Good morning. It's good to be here. I appreciate the invitation to be a part of your meeting, and I hope you have a very successful conference. Today, I was asked to speak with you about pecan truffles, and I was very happy to do that as I enjoy working with them and find it to be very interesting, and hope that you will as well. But just to make sure you know where I'm coming from on this subject, I know I spoke with you once earlier about diseases, and that is my primary job. I'm a plant pathologist, and I work mainly in the area of disease control. Basically, I'm a field biologist who enjoys mycology also, and I do have a vision for commercializing domestic truffles. I think it's something that really our pecan industry can benefit from. Is really an opportunity that we are not taking advantage of. I did want to point out that I am not really a culinary expert. That's something that ties in with the subject today on the truffles, and I don't pretend to be a culinary expert in that regard. Some of this information is based on molecular data, and I'm also not a molecular mycologist, but I collaborate with some people who are. And also, I'm not in the truffle business, so I'm not in this business to make money. And that I think is probably a good thing, that I'm trying to disseminate information, some of the science-based information about truffles, but it's not from a business perspective. So having said that, as you know from the previous presentation I gave to your group, that I work mainly with fungi that cause disease, things like pecan scab or leaf dieback. Some of our main pecan pathogens are fungi, but there are also fungi that are very beneficial, such as the truffles. And truffles are in the tuberales. From a mycological standpoint, the truffle itself is a below-ground reproductive structure. There are many species. There are at least 200 species of ascomycete fungi that produce and disperse their spores in the form of a truffle as the fruiting body. As it says there, they are below ground. There's many fungi that are hypogeous or occur below ground, well over 1,000 species. And of course, the whole purpose of a fruiting body is to produce spores and disseminate them. If you do that below ground, that's not a real efficient means of dispersal versus, say, a fungus that fruits above ground and produces a mushroom. So the odor of these structures is very important. The odor produced by a truffle attracts animals. The animals smell them and dig them up and consume them, and then they pass through the animal, and that is basically biologically their means of dispersal. The odor also is what gives them value for food and makes them desirable from that standpoint. And this has been known for a long time. So truffles have been gathered since before the time of Christ. They're some of the most desirable food items in the world, some of the most expensive food items in the world. But it varies quite a bit among species. Some species of truffles really have no value. The truffle itself is mycorrhizal. This term comes from the Greek root words for mushroom and root. So literally, it's a mushroom root. It's a symbiotic relationship between the hyphae of fungi, certain fungi, and the roots of the plant themselves. And they grow together to form a unique new structure. Some are inside the root, some are outside. The truffles are ectomycorrhizal, which means they're outside. They form a mantle of growth around the root itself. And this really has some benefits in protecting the root, making it a healthier root. It is very common. Many woody plants have this type of relationship, and it's a true mutual relationship. It benefits the fungus as well as the plant. It's been known for a long time. Do pecans have mycorrhizae? Yes. They're going back into the 1930s. Woodruff described 7 different species of mycorrhizae. And also pointed out that nearly all the small roots on pecan trees are mycorrhizal. There are things that can disrupt that, things like cultivation or drought, but they usually reform quickly after that disruption has passed. And this is a picture of a pecan root with the arrows pointing. You see the small mycorrhizal roots here. They're the smallest roots on a pecan tree. These tips, you can see they look very different, the ones that are mycorrhizal versus some of the others that are do not have the mycorrhiza on them. So very characteristic and easy to see. There's, as I said, many species that can do this. Our subject today is the pecan truffle. The current scientific name is Tuber leonii, and this picture shows what some really nice typical pecan truffle specimens look like. This species was originally found in Austin, Texas back in the 50s. Someone found them in a flower bed in their yard, and the species was originally described as Tuber texense since it was found in Texas. Then in 1987, I found this same truffle in Georgia and started realizing that it was very common in Georgia. No one had really realized it was here, but there was quite a few orchards in Georgia that had these. In 1996, then, the name was changed. The mycologist looked at it in more detail, and it was no longer determined to be just Tuber texense, but it was lumped with another truffle, Tuber leonii. They were determined to be the same species. And so when that change was made, then the host range was expanded, the geographical range was expanded. So we know now that it occurs at least from Mexico through the entire U.S. up into southern Canada. And the host range was expanded, includes basswood, various oaks, other species in addition to pecans. But I will say the taxonomy on this is still changing, and I'm sure will be something different as we move ahead in the future. Where the pecan truffle stands today, this is a map I got from Dr. Matt Smith, University of Florida, one of my collaborators, and his student, Ben Lemon. We've worked together in assembling samples from all over the country. This marks on the map all the different places that we verified this species to occur. So you can see it's widely across the United States. There are some other species similar that we'll be talking about in a minute, but it's locally abundant in some pecan orchards, not in others, and it's found on oaks and other species, as I mentioned before. So where can I find pecan truffles? They're found in many orchards. As I just mentioned, though, not all orchards have them, and within an orchard, they'll be on certain trees. And when you think about the biology as I just described, if that fungus has not been introduced on an individual tree, if it's not found on the roots of the tree, you don't have truffles there. So within an orchard, you might find it on one tree, and then 4 or 5 trees down the road do not have it, and then another tree might. So it pays to make note where you find it, because those are the best places to look in future years. They do occur very near the soil surface in the upper few inches, and sometimes they're exposed. Within an orchard on the edge of a herbicide strip tends to collect organic matter. That's a good place to look. Also on the northeast exposure is more likely to perhaps have them. As I mentioned, they do occur on other hosts like oaks and hickories. If you're hunting truffles, where would you rather hunt them? At a nice manicured pecan orchard, or out in the woods where there's briars and poison ivy, or perhaps rattlesnakes? It's much easier to hunt them in a pecan orchard. And when you realize the biology, how they're associated with that host, you really couldn't have a better setting than to have hundreds or thousands of acres of manicured trees that are the preferred host for this fungus. and it's mowed. You have herbicide strips. It's very easy to search. So a pecan orchard is really an ideal place to find truffles. This graph illustrates some of the work that was done in Matt's lab looking at distribution of the fungus and other mycorrhizal fungi. And I want to emphasize there's many other fungi that are mycorrhizal on the roots of pecans. The pecan tree produces a lot of exudates in the soil that are a preferred food source for a lot of fungi. So truffles are just one of many fungi on the roots. And I'll just summarize this graph very briefly. Basically, the height of the bar indicates the abundance of the individual organism. And on the bottom here, it may be hard for you to read, but there's many different species here of mycorrhizal fungi. The one I have circled is Tuberleonii, the pecan truffle, and it's the taller bar here on the bottom. And the darker part of the bar indicates the abundance on pecan. The little light color at the tip is the abundance on other native trees surrounding that pecan orchard. And it's just two different ways of looking at that, the top graph and the bottom graph. But the take-home message is that the pecan tree is a very good host, and the abundance is much greater on pecans than it is in the oaks and hickories and other hosts that are surrounding the pecan orchard. So pecan clearly is a very good and preferred host for this species. As I mentioned recently there's many fungi in pecan orchards that are not truffles, and I get pictures and samples sent in. In fact, the one on the left was a picture came from Argentina a number of years ago, and it is not a truffle. It was sent as an inquiry regarding that. I get other things come in. This is a very common inhabitant of pecan orchards also. Pisolithus tinctorius can be abundant in some orchards. It's not detrimental. It's also a beneficial fungus, but also neither of these are ones you would want to consume. So it's important to distinguish these from a truffle if you want to try to use these for a food source. This is what the true truffle looks like, Tuberleonii. The fruiting body itself, a close-up. This is a cross-section. In section B, it's very attractive. This is the stroma where the actual spores are formed. As I mentioned, this is just a ball of spores to be disseminated. So if you look a little closer on all these little dark and light areas there, you would find just thousands of these, the ascospores that are each one in a little sac, or ascus. There's usually 4 in each one. They're very spiny. And so that's what a truffle is composed of. And then this is a close-up of the mycorrhizae itself. These are the roots, and you can see that envelope of mycelium of the fungus all around the root tips. So that is diagnostic of the Tuberleonii mycorrhizae. In terms of where they occur in the orchard, this is just a diagram. All the little dark bodies here are what could be truffles. They can occur anywhere from right next to the tree all the way out beyond the drip line, wherever the roots are. We do not find them deeper in the soil. Some other species of truffles occur, 10 or 12 inches down in the soil. We do not see that. This species fruits very near the surface, sometimes even protruding from the surface. That makes them a little easier to find. Here we have a picture of one sticking out of the surface right beside an irrigation line. When that's the case, they are relatively easy to see when you just walk through the orchard. Quite often, though, they're deeper and covered with soil, so that's a more difficult target. For a lot of years, I would find them simply by raking. So you take a rake and remove the top part of the soil and go to areas, especially if you know where they have occurred in the past, is the best place to find them. Takes a lot of time, a lot of energy. Another way that I know some people who've harvested in this way is to use a leaf blower. And if you have loose debris or leaves on the surface, a lot of organic matter that makes a lighter soil texture, you can use the leaf blower to blow that away and actually see the truffles sticking out of the ground. The best way really though is to use a truffle dog, and they are very fast. They will go only to the most mature truffles, so you're getting a better quality truffle. And one advantage of this is that you harvest the most mature truffles. They have the most aroma. And the other method is a lot more destructive. When you're raking, you rake up the immature truffles and the mature. And once you rake them up, they're done for. So you want to harvest as much as you can the mature truffles, and with the dog, you can come back multiple times and continue to harvest the truffles as they mature. So a good dog is extremely valuable. Of course, they're also expensive. This is a Lagota Romagnola, is a classic truffle dog, although other species have been trained. This gentleman lives up near Washington, D.C., and this is his dog, Estes, and he's as good a truffle dog as I've ever seen. So that greatly expedites finding them. And we've done some work. This is one day we went out. These are the truffles that we found with the help of Estes. And we did a comparison. We also were searching without the dog. And where we had the dog, we had more truffles. We had much bigger, more mature truffles. Just all the way around, if you want to be serious about truffle hunting, a good dog is definitely the way to go. I already mentioned the relationship with quality. The culinary value of the mature truffles is going to be much greater, because if you have immature, they don't have the odor, the aroma, and that's what gives them value from a food standpoint. All right, so this is sort of a similar graph that I showed you before, showing the abundance of the ectomycorrhizal fungi on pecans. And again, the variety, you may not be able to read all these, but there's sclerodermas and all kinds of other fungi that can be on the roots of pecan trees. But this was a survey we did of 5 pecan orchards. And the taller the bar, the more common that species is. So obviously the one to the far left with the tall bar here is the most commonly found mycorrhizal species in this particular study. And it turns out that was tuber species 36. The second one here is tuber leonii. The different markings were what were in different orchards. So you can see that some orchards, the tuber leonii was found in 3 of the orchards. The other 2, it was not in at all. But where it was found, it was one of the most common species. There were 2 other tuber species. There was this one to the far left, which is tuber species 36. And then over here a little further to the right, a much smaller number, but there was tuber species 47. So what this indicates was this was done on the basis of molecular, taking the DNA from these roots. In the molecular analysis, the phylogeny showed that these were clear species that were present, but we really didn't know what they looked like. It was just based on the DNA from the roots. We did not know what the fruiting bodies of these looked like. So we did know tuber leonii, which is the second one here. So that one was clearly known, but it was also obvious we had 2 other species of truffles in these orchards and didn't know what they were. So it took some additional work, additional sampling, and turns out that tuber 36 and 37 were unique species. We were able to locate some of the specimens, and unbeknownst to me, Dr. Smith and his lab decided to name one of those after me. So this one on the left, they named tuber Brennemanii. The one on the right is tuber floridanum. You can see the structural attributes of each of these. They do look a little different, but they're both found on pecan trees. They are both possibly edible fungi also, but they They occur in varying degrees in different orchards, just like the tuber leonii does. And these probably won't be the last ones that are found, but these tuber and tuber leonii are the most common in our orchards today. I've hinted a little bit already about the edibility. Presumably they were edible, as truffles are considered edible fungi. But the question was, were they any good? Because there are a lot of truffles that really have no food value because they aren't desirable. So, and our growers did not know at all even about truffles when we started finding these. So we had growers who were basically throwing them away. We have, as I'm sure you do, you have cleaning tables where you take the rocks and the sticks out of the pecans, and we had growers who were finding these and removing them off the sorting tables and throwing them away. So I started thinking early on that they might have some value. And so I would find some and I would send them to chefs that had contacts with chefs at restaurants, and would just send them a small bag and tell them to try them. And they started getting reports back that they liked them. They thought that they were very good. And so there was a small market developed, and they really in the whole culinary market, it's a big thing to have local produce and local food. So the idea of having something like a truffle that has a well-known place in the culinary world, but having a local truffle really gave it a unique appeal. And so there's a lot of interest in that. And this just shows one of the dishes, a local fish, local peaches, local pecans, local truffles. You see the slices of the truffles here on top. It has a really interesting, unique visual appeal. So this type of use of the truffle has great potential, I think. So is there a market for these? Yes. Commercially there is. It is still quite small. And I think one reason the interest has been huge. I get contacts all the time like this one from a chef who has heard about them. They want to try them. They find them really interesting. One of the restaurants in Athens, Georgia, has used them. These are some of the different recipes. I won't go through all these, but a lot of times they're used in conjunction with other local produce. Things like pecans obviously would be a logical companion product. But even other traditional Southern things like grits and collards, and then putting truffles on those really is an interesting combination of things that restaurants really like. However, as I said, it's still a fairly limited product here, and I think part of it is the difficulty of supplying and producing these truffles. So there is a little more research taking place now. It's actually been very, very little research over the years has been focused on this organism. And so still it's right now currently a small scale cottage industry is what I would call it. I think the potential is there for this to increase. There's been articles written about these. As I mentioned, chefs like them. And the current demand, if there was a supply to meet the demand, the current demand could be quite large, I think. Why is it hard to meet this demand? As I mentioned, the truffles grow underground, so they're hard to find. There's not many truffle dogs around. And if you don't have a truffle dog, you can put in a hard day's work just to find some truffles, especially if you don't really know where to go. So I think cultivation is going to be a big part. And cultivating pecans is still in its infancy, or cultivating truffles. So the current supply of this species is wild truffles. There are some other species that are being farmed. And at this point, we have not done that with tuber leonii to any degree. And the wild ones are becoming harder to find. And I think there's a couple reasons. We're getting more aggressive in our pecan orchards with hedging, with tree removal. We're also using more systemic fungicides, highly systemic fungicides like the phosphates. And I do not know for sure, there's no direct evidence on this, but the phosphates are highly systemic and are known to move down the tree through the phloem into the roots. And I think there's a possibility that they may be reducing the colonization with this fungus, but that's a theory at this time. But I think to really produce the quantities that we need, inoculated trees and growing orchards for truffle production would be desirable. We've tried inoculating old trees, not very successful. The old trees, as you've seen from some of the previous graphs I showed you, the roots are heavily colonized. There's many fungi that want to be on those roots, and it's difficult from a competition standpoint once that root system is established to get the truffles going. We started doing some initial inoculation studies about 20 years ago, very crude. We did have some success. The first time we did this, it took 11 years from the time we planted the tree until we saw some truffle production. So it showed that it could be done. And I think we've learned a lot since then. The key to inoculation is minimizing the other fungi. So essentially inoculation procedures are grinding up truffles, putting them on the roots of trees, and letting them establish, but doing it in a way that you minimize the other competing fungi that want to be on those roots, and they are airborne. There are spores in the air all the time of these other fungi. So we could talk more about that, but that's the basic procedure. And we have done some initial trials where we're scaling up procedures for doing this on a bigger scale. This is how we produce our pecan trees, seedlings, and our trees for transplant. Is we have raised beds that we fumigate, and you plant the pecans in these to grow the seedling. And so the basic procedure is to put the ground truffle in the hole, and so the fumigant kills the competitors in the soil. As the seeds germinate, the first thing they encounter is the truffle fungus. And so when you harvest these seedlings then to transplant out in the orchard, the roots already have that truffle fungus on the roots. And that's when you, I think, have the greatest chance of success. And you can plant blocks where every tree has the truffle. It won't be hit or miss like it is in a natural planting. And this shows us digging the trees. You grow the trees generally for 2 to 3 years. You, of course, can graft them to whatever cultivar pecan you want them to be. And the root system is the one that has the truffle established. And so it will be on that young tree when it's planted out in the field. This shows some research data from where we did these evaluations. It might be a little hard to follow, but basically the bottom line is showing to the far left here, these bars to the far left are where we put the tuber fungus and where we also fumigated. So where we fumigated to kill the other competing fungi, we use methyl bromide, chloropicrin. We had a much greater success. The next here is where we inoculated with the fungus, but where we did not fumigate. So you can see our success dropped quite a bit, maybe a third or a fourth of what it was with fumigation. So without fumigation, we still had success, but we did not get near as much tuber leonii. And then over here to the right is where we didn't inoculate. And it didn't matter if you fumigated or not. If you didn't inoculate, the fungus wasn't there. So I think if you can grow trees with fumigation and inoculate, that's clearly your best chance of success, because you're reducing the competitors. Some other work we did was looking at how much inoculum you needed. The truffle itself is the inoculum. That truffle is the ball of spores. And so the less you can use, the better. If you have to use if you have to use a couple grams of truffles for every tree, that's going to be expensive. And so we did a rate study here. And the pink tall bars here show basically the success of inoculation from the different amounts of inoculum across the top Went from 1 gram to a half a gram to a tenth, all the way down to 0.05 grams. And you can see as it gets less, the other bars down here are your competing mycorrhizal fungi. As you put in less of the truffle, you start getting more of the competitors. But still, you can get down to 0.05 grams and still get a high rate of success of colonization with tuberolionii. So this is some of the kind of foundational data we're trying to generate to help support understanding how to inoculate and commercialize or be able to grow colonized trees on a more large basis. So that's good basic information for those trying to establish inoculated nurseries. There are some availability of truffle inoculated trees. This gentleman is Dr. Charles Lefevre. He grows other truffle inoculated trees out on the West Coast. And he came to Georgia, got some pecan truffles, and he each year has produced a small number of inoculated pecan trees. And I believe he is still doing that. It's some years he has some years he doesn't. But there is some commercial source of trees starting to become available. One of the questions we were interested in is, can you inoculate pecans with other truffles? And the answer to that is yes. Greg Benito, one of our early collaborators, has done a lot of the work in this area. And so they have found pecan trees to be a good host of multiple other truffle species. And he's got some publications on that here I've shown on the right. So he's tested a number of species, including those listed here on my slide. And so the answer is yes. There are many kinds of other truffles that can be grown on a pecan tree. My personal preference is here in Georgia for the native truffle, the tuberolionii. I just like the idea of growing a native truffle here. And again, it's kind of a unique market and a unique approach to this truffle, but I think some of the others can be grown here as well. And we are actually looking at that now. We have some trials here in Tifton. Some of these trees were inoculated by Dr. Benito, and we are now growing them here. We're going to see if we get production under our environment. At this point, they've been out there 3 or 4 years. We have not seen production yet, but at some point, as they mature, I'm hoping that we'll have production of multiple species of truffles under our pecan trees. We're also looking at some other things like fumigation of these planting sites prior to planting, try to minimize the amount of competition from the other species in the soil. And another aspect we're looking at is soil pH. pH can be important in the biology of some of the truffle species. So with other species of truffles, it's known that higher pHs are favorable for the truffle. And this is the result of some work we did in Georgia pecan orchards. And I'm not sure if you can see the numbers, but to the left is low pH from 4.5 to 5. And to the right is a higher pHs from 6.6 to 7.3. The blue bars at the bottom are the prevalence of the truffle. And so you can see clearly that the higher the pH, the more prevalent the truffle is. So higher pHs are one thing we know that does favor the development of tuberolionii. So there's a lot that we need to learn, but there are some things we know about growing these truffles. Ultimately, I think that there is potential for this to be a commodity, to be a business. We still have much we need to know, but we know we can make money growing pecans, and I think that the possibility of making money growing truffles as well is something that really intrigues me, because they do occur naturally, and I think with some help they can be grown on an even larger scale. So hopefully there will be more secrets uncovered that will help us to do this. There are some orchards where they are already occurring at a high level. This is a picture from an orchard in North Carolina, and this shows some of the harvest they made one afternoon. They sent me this picture, and this orchard produces large specimens, as you see here. And we're trying to understand why some orchards have these and many orchards do not. So if we can reproduce the conditions such as you have here and produce this kind of truffle consistently, I think the potential commercialization is quite good. I see this as a chance for some additional income. Pecan farming is tough. One thing we've dealt with in recent years in Georgia is hurricanes and tornadoes, where we've had the loss of large numbers of trees. Prices have not been that great. So this can help perhaps provide additional income. And one real role I would see for this is smaller scale plantings, where you can plant smaller orchards of trees that would be designed more for truffle production. We have a lot of people here interested in growing pecans, but having the equipment to do it really is expensive, and it's not the best crop really to do on a smaller scale unless you have perhaps a high value return with something like the truffle. But the beauty is it's a win-win with the value of the mycorrhizae to the health of the tree. There's no downside or no cost there to growing the truffle in addition to pecans. There's other truffles here in North America that are being explored and that are increasing in popularity. The Oregon black truffle, there's an Appalachian truffle up in the mountains, and then as shown here, of course, the pecan truffle we've just been talking about. And so the demand and the interest in truffles in general, I think, is increasing. So I think the pecan truffle has a good future. I'm glad to have the chance to talk with you all about it here today. And I'll be interested in knowing more how things may develop with your industry in Argentina. But I wish you all the best. I've enjoyed talking with you. And again, hope you have a great conference. There is a few resources here. I mentioned the truffle tree on the seeds, or inoculated trees. And the first reference here is my website. Information there on peanuts and pecans, but there's a section there on truffles. We even have a YouTube video. You might check that out. Gato baby, taking the dog out and finding truffles in the orchard. It's kind of an interesting little YouTube you might look at. But anyway, I hope this has been helpful, and I wish you all the very best. These are some of the collaborators that I mentioned that have contributed to some of the content that I presented here today. These are some of the real mycologists I've worked with that have really developed a lot of our information based on the molecular aspects of the truffle itself. With that, thank you very much, and I wish you all the best.